I don't buy the idea that, whatever was going on, he just ducked a subpoena. I can't believe that." The voice is calm, almost resigned. "It's simple. It's about 70-30. 70% is respect. 30% is the memory of a man Hollywood believed could do anything. Sing, dance, act. Walk into a room and bend its mood with nothing but a grin. That's how most people remember Sammy Davis Jr., a flawless entertainer, the glittering heartbeat of the Rat Pack. But far fewer remember what he could never outrun. Behind the tuxedo and the spotlight, there was said to be a secret that followed him long after the applause faded. In the hidden corners of Los Angeles, in the 1,960 seconds, when the city smelled of gasoline, liquor, and ambition, he was rumored to slip into midnight gatherings. Velvet robes brushing against marble floors, black candles burning low in heavy brass holders, strange symbols traced into the air, never spoken aloud. Friends insisted it was a joke, a prank played by a restless showman. Others swore it was anything but. So how did a child prodigy from Harlem, once held up as a symbol of black excellence, become entangled in whispers of occult ceremonies and forbidden promises? Behind the easy smile of the Candyman, there was a shadow most people never imagined. A man pulled between faith and fame, between survival and something far darker than anything the spotlight ever revealed. Tonight, we reopen the sealed file on Sammy Davis Jr. and ask the question Hollywood never wanted on record. To understand that question, you have to go back to where it all began. Harlem, winter, December 1925. Cold air threading through narrow streets, jazz leaking through cracked windows of brownstone buildings, laughter spilling from basement clubs where music was not just entertainment, it was a way to eat, to breathe, to forget. In one of those dim rooms, a boy named Samuel George Davis Jr. took his first breath, the son of two vaudevillians who lived on rhythm instead of rest. His parents, always on the road, built their lives on cramped trains, backstage mirrors, and the sound of applause. His cradle was not comfort. It was motion. It was tickets punched at midnight, stage lights flaring in his eyes, and the muffled roar of an audience on the other side of a curtain. Before he could write his own name, he already knew how to hit a mark. At just 3 years old, Sammy stepped into the Will Maston Trio, a small touring act that played smoky bars, cramped nightclubs, and backroom stages across the country. While other children lined up for school bells, he took his lessons under spotlights, learning timing instead of arithmetic, reading an audience instead of a textbook. He learned the language of a crowd, how a pause could be louder than a punchline, how a smile could deflect cruelty. On those tiny stages, the child became a showman, and the showman became his armor. The Great Depression turned entertainment into a lifeline. Work meant survival, and the trio kept moving. By the time he was a teenager, Sammy had crossed more state lines than most grown men. Train cars, cheap hotels, and second-hand suits were his textbooks. But the applause that followed him from town to town stopped at the edge of the stage. Outside, the lights went dark. On the streets, he was just another black boy in a country that treated his brilliance as a threat. The spotlight could protect him for an hour. The world outside never did. Then came 1944. The draft notice: Sammy traded tap shoes for army boots. The war was cruel, but the racism that greeted him in uniform cut deeper. White soldiers mocked his size, his nose, his skin. They wrote slurs on his locker. They broke his nose. They beat him for existing in the wrong body in the wrong barracks. One night, out of options, he fought back the only way he knew how, not with fists, but with performance. He sang, danced, and joked for the same unit that had tormented him, and for the first time, the beatings stopped. The army had become a twisted kind of stage, and it taught him a brutal lesson. Performance could be both shield and weapon. He learned how dangerous it was to be seen and how powerful. After the war, America shifted. So did Sammy. He returned to the Will Maston Trio, sharper now, his style honed by pain and discipline. His timing was perfect, his charisma impossible to ignore. It didn't take long for the industry to notice. Frank Sinatra saw him first, not just as a dancer, but as an event, a phenomenon wrapped in a 5'5" frame. Sinatra recognized something in him, a refusal to surrender. By the mid-1950s, Sammy Davis Jr. had already broken one of the toughest barriers in American show business. He became the first black entertainer allowed to headline in segregated Las Vegas, a triumph carved into neon and cigarette smoke. But that victory came with a cruel twist. He could command the stage, sell out rooms, and make casinos a fortune, yet still be denied the right to walk through the front door or sit at the tables he filled. He smiled for audiences who weren't allowed to dine with him. He dressed for rooms that refused him basic respect. Still, he kept going. One show, then another. One barrier shattered, and then the next. Eventually, Hollywood was forced to bow and call him what he had already proven: he was Mr. Show Business. Then came the Rat Pack. Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy, kings of the night. They drank together, gambled together, turned the Las Vegas Strip into their private kingdom. Their banter was legendary, their chemistry effortless. But behind the tuxedos and the clinking glasses stood a man still negotiating for his place in a world that cheered his voice while questioning his very presence. By 1972, the Candyman had turned him into a household name. Children hummed his chorus. Presidents reached for his hand. He had become more than a star, he was an institution. Yet, underneath every standing ovation, there was said to be a quieter truth. The man the world adored was still shadowed by something he couldn't quite name. The higher the curtain rose, the heavier the doubt became. Somewhere between the applause and the empty hotel rooms, Sammy Davis Jr. started asking himself a question that would haunt him. What had he traded to be loved by everyone? And what parts of himself had been left behind, somewhere in the dark? Hollywood in the late 1960 seconds was a fever dream, a city hallucinating on its own power. Money, sin, and influence all wore the same cologne. It was the age of rebellion, of psychedelics, of doors that stayed closed to the public and wide open for stars, chasing a truth that traditional religion no longer seemed to give them. Inside that glittering chaos, Sammy Davis Jr. reportedly found something darker than fame. According to a Rolling Stone report published on August 4, 2024, he became entangled with the Church of Satan, led by the infamous showman priest Anton LaVey. Witnesses claimed that in 1968, at a mansion perched high above Los Angeles, Sammy attended what insiders called a night of power. Guests, they said, wore black robes lined with scarlet. Candlelight flickered against polished gold mirrors. Between jazz records and whispers that sounded like Latin, he was introduced as Brother Sammy, a celebrity initiate in what some described as a cult for the powerful and the curious. To the public, he remained the smiling man singing "The Candy Man," selling sweetness and charm. Behind closed doors, according to those stories, he was chasing something different. Maybe protection, maybe a sense of belonging, maybe some kind of absolution for sins he couldn't confess anywhere else. Hollywood at that time was drowning in paranoia. Careers were built on masks, and contracts were rumored to carry more than signatures. LaVey's gatherings, according to those who spoke about them later, promised a new gospel, a release from guilt, tailor-made for men who had spent their lives performing for approval. So what pushed him toward that world? Was it pure exhaustion, a man suffocating behind his own grin? Or was it hunger? A need for power in a business that had used his talent while never truly treating him as an equal. The story fractures between disbelief and dread. Some insist it was all theater, just another role for a consummate performer. Others believe he embraced the vows with sincerity. But one thing remains. After 1968, something in Sammy seemed different. The faith that once carried him through war and injury had shifted into something harder to recognize. This is not a simple tale of demons and fire. It is the portrait of a man balanced on the edge between salvation and survival, and of a Hollywood machine that knew how to feed on both. The name Sammy Davis Jr. conjures up polished tuxedos, quick laughter, and the sharp heel-click rhythm of a man who never seemed to sleep. But underneath all that shine was something fragile, a lifetime of bargaining with a world that loved his talent and still hated his skin. His story was never just about stardom. It was about how a man could be celebrated and erased at the exact same time. It began, once again, in those back rooms of Harlem where the glow of the Apollo Theater flickered like a promise. Sammy Davis, Jr. was born on December 8, 1925, to two working performers, Elvira Sanchez, a Cuban-born dancer, and Sammy Davis, Sr., a vaudeville entertainer. They weren't famous. They were survivors, people who knew that applause might be the only paycheck that arrived on time. By the time Sammy turned 3, the stage had already claimed him. He joined the Will Maston Trio, traveling with his father and his Uncle Will. There were no toys, no stable classrooms, only train cars that smelled of coal and metal, smoke-filled bars, and budget motels where the wallpaper peeled like old makeup after a long show. While other children learned to read and write, Sammy learned to stay on his feet. He dodged beer bottles, memorized routines, and timed his tap steps between the laughter of half-drunk strangers. His childhood vanished somewhere between curtain calls and closing times. The stage gave him purpose, but it quietly stole his innocence. At 9 years old, the trio played a small southern town. After the show, a white waiter refused to serve them. As his father argued, Sammy stood in silence, clutching his tap shoes like armor. That moment left an imprint. It was the first time he truly understood that talent could open doors on stage, but not in life. Talent couldn't buy dignity. Years later, war would repeat the same lesson, only louder. In 1944, Sammy was drafted into the U.S. Army. Officially, he was there to entertain troops. In reality, he found himself surrounded by hostility from the men in his own uniform. His size and his skin color turned him into a target. Fellow soldiers mocked his nose, scrawled slurs across his locker, and, according to later accounts, beat him so badly that his jaw had to be wired shut. When people later asked how he survived that time, he reportedly answered with the only truth he knew: performing saved him. It was the one weapon he could use that didn't spill anyone's blood. But the abuse left scars no audience could see. He came out of the army, not consumed by hatred, but hollowed out. Discipline and humiliation had been drilled into him in equal measure. That combination, pain wrapped inside perfection, would define him for the rest of his life. When the war ended, the world felt new, and Sammy was determined to claim his share of it. In 1951, the Will Maston Trio landed a major booking at Ciro's, an elite Los Angeles nightclub known for its wealthy, mostly white clientele. At first, the room barely looked up. Then Sammy began to sing Laura. His voice slid through the air like smoke over silk. By the time he reached the final note, the crowd was on its feet. It wasn't just applause, it was a rare kind of acceptance, a black entertainer conquering a white Hollywood audience on his own terms. That night, according to multiple accounts, Frank Sinatra was in the room. It changed everything. Sinatra admired his precision, his humor, and his refusal to fold, no matter how rigged the game seemed. The two became inseparable, the white superstar and the black prodigy, a duo who could crack the ceiling of American racism with a joke, a song, and a shared drink. By the late 1952, Sammy was now a central figure in the Rat Pack alongside Dean Martin and Sinatra. Their shows ruled Las Vegas. They gambled, they drank, they paraded through casinos like kings. Night after night, they packed theaters, their chemistry so effortless it seemed untouchable. But the city beneath their feet was still segregated. Black entertainers could headline the biggest hotels and bring in millions, but they were barred from sleeping in the rooms they filled. Sammy stayed in boarding houses off the Strip and slipped back into the casinos through kitchen doors. He'd step out from behind those service entrances, adjust his tuxedo, and walk straight into the spotlight. The smile, by then, was reflex, a mask he'd learned to wear better than anyone. Then came 1954, the year death came close enough to smell. On November 19th, driving back from a show in San Bernardino along Route 66, Sammy's car collided head-on with another vehicle. The crash shattered his face and destroyed his left eye. When he woke in the hospital, bandaged and terrified, the first question he asked was whether he could still sing. The second question, he reportedly whispered, was whether God was punishing him. As he struggled to walk, to dance, to find his balance again, he turned deeper into religion. The idea of one true faith soothed him at first, but the more he read, the more contradictions he saw. A visiting rabbi told him stories of Judaism, of exile, endurance, and a people who survived by stubbornness and covenant. Those stories felt familiar. Sammy saw himself in them, a man pushed out yet still standing. By 1955, he had converted to Judaism, saying that the Star of David reminded him of surviving through suffering. As his profile rose, so did the contradictions inside him. In 1960, he married Swedish actress May Britt. Their relationship crossed racial lines at a time when doing so was as dangerous as any stunt he'd ever performed. The backlash was immediate and violent. Death threats arrived. Studio executives warned him his career might collapse. According to reports, Frank Sinatra sent bodyguards to watch over them. The marriage endured the fury, but it carved another wound into Sammy's faith in the world. Behind every romantic ballad he sang afterward was the echo of a man punished simply for loving someone the wrong color in the wrong country at the wrong time. Still, he climbed higher. Films like Ocean's 11 and hits like The Candyman turned him into something bigger than a star. He became America's first black male superstar on a scale the country had rarely seen. But every handshake, every contract, every TV appearance came with unspoken rules. Be charming, not angry. Be grateful, not political. Be dazzling, not dangerous. Every time he smiled for the cameras, a little more of his true self slipped into the background. By the late 1,960 seconds, that smile was no longer a choice. It was muscle memory, trained through fear, pain, and repetition. And that was when the story began to warp. That was when rumors of parties, symbols, and darker loyalties started clinging to his name. That's when the storylines around him began to twist. By 1968, Sammy's lifelong search for identity and faith led him down a path few expected. Friends claimed he had started attending private gatherings hosted by Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. A later Rolling Stone article described those nights as something between cabaret and ceremony, a strange hybrid of performance and ritual. According to that reporting, Hollywood insiders were said to slip into black robes, glasses of champagne in hand, while they chanted through what some dismissed as mock rituals. For a man who had turned his entire life into a performance, it was hard to tell where the act stopped and the belief began. Some people said it was nothing more than theater, another role for a restless showman. Others believed he was testing the limits of faith itself. Actor Eddie Murphy once recounted a conversation in which Sammy allegedly told him, "Satan is as powerful as God. You just have to know how to deal with him." Whether that was metaphor, provocation, or conviction, no one could say with certainty, but from that moment, the rumors clung to him like smoke. Money didn't save him from the shadows either. By the 1,980 seconds, years of excess had caught up with him. Luxury cars, high-stakes gambling, endless touring, all piled onto a life lived at full speed. The result, according to records, was brutal. When he died in 1990, he reportedly owed more than $7 million to the IRS. The man who had once performed for presidents and royalty left behind debts so heavy that his estate had to be sold off piece by piece. Costumes, trophies, keepsakes, the artifacts of a lifetime on stage, scattered to the highest bidder. Addiction was another quiet enemy. Cocaine, by many accounts, became a tool and a trap. Fuel for the stage, escape from the emptiness afterward. He once admitted that success and loneliness had fused together until he could no longer tell where one stopped and the other began. Nights blurred into mornings scented with champagne and amyl nitrite, the fast, dangerous rush of a man desperate to outrun exhaustion. Behind the laughter that defined the Rat Pack's golden years, there was always a lower, darker rhythm, a heartbeat that pounded faster than any ovation. There were murmurs about his private life, too, whispered stories of secret affairs, an intense fascination with pornography, and a line between pleasure and performance that had almost completely dissolved. Hollywood, always hungry for a fresh scandal, devoured every rumor it could find. Yet Sammy rarely tried to paint himself as innocent. Instead, he carried his mistakes openly, as if they were campaign ribbons from a war most people never even saw. If his life had been a film, its true theme wouldn't have been fame. It would have been belonging. From the start, Sammy had been searching for a place that would let him exist as all of his identities at once. Black, Jewish, American, human. The most dangerous chapter in that search came in 1957, when he fell in love with actress Kim Novak, one of Hollywood's brightest white stars. The affair was passionate, but it was also lethal in its implications. According to long-circulating accounts, Harry Cohn, then the powerful head of Columbia Pictures, was furious. Some stories even claimed he involved organized crime figures to solve the problem. Within days, Sammy allegedly began receiving threats, warning him to end the relationship or risk losing far more than his career. Terrified, he broke it off. A few weeks later, he married black dancer Lorraine White, in what several friends later described as a staged union designed to calm the scandal and protect his life. The marriage barely lasted. The fear did. Even his faith became a battlefield. His conversion to Judaism gave his life shape and meaning, but it also cut him off in unexpected ways. Some in the black community questioned where his loyalties truly lay. Some white Jews quietly questioned whether he truly belonged among them. He once said that being both black and Jewish meant, "You get killed twice before the cross burns." Through it all, he never walked away from the stage. Every performance became a negotiation between acceptance and authenticity, between the jokes people wanted and the pain he carried. He sang, "I've gotta be me." But very few understood how tragic that title sounded coming from his mouth. In the end, the legend of Sammy Davis Jr. was built on contradictions. A man who talked about God but was linked to the devil, a performer who gave joy while living in quiet sorrow, a survivor who pushed through racism yet was ultimately consumed by the scars it left behind. Behind the polished figure known as Mr. Wonderful still stood that boy from Harlem, the one who never stopped dancing, not because he loved constant motion, but because, for him, silence was worse. And when the light finally began to fade, one question lingered over everything he had done, every rumor, every compromise. Did Sammy Davis Jr. really sell his soul? Or did the world simply take it from him, one ovation at a time? If you really want to understand Sammy Davis Jr., you have to strip away the headlines, mute the hit records, and look at the deal beneath it all. Not a contract on paper, but a bargain older than the entertainment industry itself. A quiet arrangement offered to almost every black artist who ever stepped into a spotlight in America. The terms were always the same. We'll turn you into a legend, but only if you play by our rules. Every stage he walked onto came with a trade-off. He gave up pieces of his dignity in exchange for visibility. He swallowed his anger so he could be accepted. Out in the open, in a country still carved by segregation, he became a symbol of progress, proof that a black man could stand center stage and make the room erupt. But behind closed doors, the old rules never really changed. He was still directed toward the service entrance, still reminded of his place. The paradox was brutal. The brighter his spotlight burned, the longer and darker his shadow stretched behind him. The entertainment world of the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds was built on illusion, and Sammy played that game better than almost anyone alive. He laughed louder, danced faster, smiled longer than anyone asked him to. On camera, it looked effortless. Off camera, it was fatigue, the deep, bone-heavy tiredness of a man who knew he could never afford to stop performing, even alone in a room. To white America, he became the safe version of blackness. Charming, quick-witted, non-threatening. He could trade jokes with Sinatra on stage, but he still wasn't welcome in the same swimming pool. He could make middle America rise to its feet, as long as he didn't remind them of the chains still rattling beneath their applause. So he learned to become a shapeshifter, part vaudeville clown, part illusionist, part survivor. But survival, especially in that world, carries a cost. At the height of his fame, Las Vegas was not just glamorous, it was controlled. The mafia, according to numerous accounts, ran the casinos and watched every move the Rat Pack made. Every drink poured, every show scheduled, every bet placed happened under their eyes. Sammy learned early that nothing on the Strip went unnoticed. One insider later claimed that when he tried to push for equal pay in 1961, the answer didn't come in numbers on a contract. It came as a physical warning, a reminder delivered by men in immaculate suits of who really owned the stage he stood on. From that point on, he stopped trying to fight the system head-on. Instead, he adapted. He played the game. He didn't exactly sell his soul. He rented it out to record labels, casino bosses, movie studios, to anyone who promised him a sliver of eternity in exchange for compliance. The more famous he became, the less control he seemed to have over his own image. Even his conversion to Judaism, something that had once been deeply personal and spiritual, was twisted by tabloids into a gimmick, a publicity stunt, not a serious searching of faith. The disconnect between who he was and who the world wanted him to be began to chew away at him from the inside. The duality was relentless. On stage, he was Mr. Wonderful, the man who could outdance, outjoke, and sometimes even outsing Sinatra himself. Off stage, he often felt like a stranger inside his own life, caught between communities, never fully rooted in either. He wasn't completely embraced by many in the black community, who sometimes saw him as too accommodating, too cozy with white power structures. And he was never fully accepted by white Hollywood as one of their own, no matter how many rooms he lit up. Writer James Baldwin once remarked that Sammy Davis Jr. had to choose between greatness and madness. Some observers believed he ended up choosing a little of both. That madness wasn't clinical insanity. It was the constant strain of being too extraordinary to ignore and too black to be allowed real peace. There is a story that rarely makes it into the polished biographies. In 1970, at a private party in Beverly Hills, Sammy was said to have walked in wearing a red satin cape embroidered with occult symbols. Guests laughed, assuming it was a joke, a prank from a man who loved theatrical entrances. He had always adored showmanship, and this felt like another stunt. But one friend later insisted the symbols stitched into that cape were not random. They were allegedly pulled directly from Anton LaVey's Church of Satan rituals. Whether that story was exaggerated, misunderstood, or entirely accurate, no one could ever fully prove. In the end, whether it was parody or belief almost didn't matter. As an act, it was rebellion. By draping himself in imagery others feared, he was sending a message back to Hollywood. You may control my contracts, my venues, my public smile, but you don't own my soul. And yet, deep down, he seemed to understand the cruel truth. He had spent his entire life feeding the very machine that exploited him, offering it his talent, his time, his body, and yes, even his pain, all while keeping that practiced grin in place. Sammy Davis Jr. became the perfect symbol of a uniquely American contradiction. Adored, used, celebrated, discarded, all at the same time. That was the price of being Mr. Wonderful. Fame had stamped his name into history, but it had also hollowed him out. In trying to belong everywhere, in every room, every crowd, every community, Sammy Davis Jr. slowly ended up belonging nowhere at all. To really see who he was, you have to dim the lights of Las Vegas, mute the laughter of the Rat Pack, and stare into the machinery underneath the glamour, the gears where a man's brilliance was forged out of exploitation and shadow. He was born in an America where black men were not expected to dream, only to survive. By the time he reached the height of his fame, he had become living proof that those same men could make their oppressors stand and applaud. His rise wasn't just his own story. It mirrored the path of almost every black entertainer who crossed the invisible line from survival to spectacle, from the minstrel shows of the 1,920 seconds to the Rat Pack stages of the 1,960 seconds. So when people whispered that Sammy Davis Jr. had made a deal with the devil, they weren't entirely wrong, just imprecise. The devil in his life was never a horned figure in a red cloak. It was the system itself. The Church of Satan meetings, the parties, the symbols, all of that, according to many accounts, was a kind of theater. What felt more real was the spiritual bankruptcy that fame demanded from him day after day. The true devil in Sammy's story was the seductive promise that you can have everything, money, power, adoration, as long as you stop asking who you really are. He was not alone in facing that paradox. Every major artist who rose during the civil rights era walked the same tightrope. To be visible, they often had to scrape away parts of their identity. To be loved, they had to act innocent while carrying the weight of guilt, anger, and generational trauma. In a way, Sammy Davis Jr. became one of the first celebrities to turn that unspoken contract into performance art. His alleged presence in occult circles was not only defiance, it was a kind of confession. The rituals, the costumes, the whispers in darkened rooms, they could all be read as metaphors for what the entertainment machine had already done to him. He had become both priest and sacrifice.